On the morning of June 20th, 2001, a 911 dispatcher in Houston receives a flat, Mouton call from a woman requesting police assistance at her residence in the Clear Lake neighborhood. The caller is 36-year-old Andrea Yates, who refuses to detail the nature of the emergency over the line. She then places a second call to her husband Rusty at his National Aeronautics and Space Administration office, telling him it is time to come home. Houston police officer David Knapp is the first to navigate the quiet, manicured streets of the middle-class suburb and arrive at the front door. Knapp finds Andrea standing in wet clothes, her eyes vacant, and she leads the officer down the central hallway of the house without a word. Mac enters the master bedroom at the end of the hall and discovers a devastating scene. 4 small children resting under a sheet on the bed. In the adjacent master bathroom, a 5th child remains submerged in the still waters of the porcelain bathtub. This grim discovery shatters the illusion of a perfect Texas family and initiates one of the most polarizing psychological investigations in American legal history. Years before the tragedy, the community recognized Andrea Kennedy as a pillar of potential. She graduated as high school valedictorian and dominated the lanes as a champion swimmer. She channeled her drive into a medical career, securing a position as a registered nurse at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. The hospital corridors required precision, and Andrea delivered it every shift. In 1993, she married Rusty Yates, a prominent computer engineer developing software for the Space Shuttle program at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. The couple projected an image of absolute success and devout faith. They embraced a rigid conservative lifestyle defined by strict gender roles and isolation from secular influences. Rusty managed the finances and career while Andrea absorbed the entirety of the domestic duties. Their ambitions shifted away from professional milestones toward building an immense family. They pursued an austere existence, moving their initial household into a converted Greyhound bus to limit material distractions. The confined space of the bus forced the family into a suffocating physical proximity. Texas heat radiated through the metal roof during the summer months, baking the interior. In this oppressive environment, Andrea managed the daily needs of her first toddlers. The growing family relocated to a spacious traditional home in the Clear Lake suburbs of Houston. The neighborhood featured wide driveways, pristine lawns, and the constant hum of central air conditioning units fighting the humid Gulf Coast weather. Behind the heavy wooden front door of the Yates residence, Andrea dedicated every waking hour to her offspring. The house echoed with the footsteps of Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and baby Mary. Noah possessed a deep curiosity, asking questions about the world outside their yard. John and Paul shadowed their older brother, turning the living room rug into a landscape for toys and games. Andrea homeschooled the older boys at the dining room table, surrounded by stacks of educational workbooks. She baked bread from scratch, sewed clothes for the children, and managed the unrelenting demands of feeding and bathing 5 young lives. Neighbors observed a quiet, intelligent mother shepherding her brood across the driveway. To outside eyes, the children appeared vibrant and cherished. The family albums showcased smiling faces and matching outfits on Sunday mornings. Yet, the physical architecture of their suburban life functioned as a fortress. The isolation severed Andrea from typical support networks, trapping her within a relentless cycle of domestic labor. This hidden exhaustion set the stage for a devastating mental collapse. The illusion of domestic perfection masked a profound psychological deterioration occurring within the walls of the Clear Lake home. Raising 5 children born in a rapid sequence placed immense physiological and mental strain on Andrea. Rusty spent long hours at the Space Center, leaving his wife to navigate the chaos of the household alone. The strict religious teachings the couple consumed preached that a mother held total responsibility for the spiritual purity of her children. These fringe sermons echoed in Andrea's mind during the quiet moments of the day. She absorbed a toxic theology claiming that flawed parenting would condemn children to the fires of hell. The immense pressure warped her perception of reality, turning every minor childhood misbehavior into a sign of spiritual doom. Exhaustion eroded her cognitive foundations. The isolation of the suburban house prevented friends from noticing the hollow look taking root in her eyes. The medical system failed to intervene, and her husband minimized the visible signs of her distress. The community viewed her quiet demeanor as pious submission rather than the onset of an expanding psychological crisis. The heavy curtains of the living room remained drawn, hiding the reality of a mind breaking under the weight of an impossible standard. The children continued their daily routines. They remained unaware that their mother viewed their salvation through a lens of impending tragedy. The fragile structure of the Yates household shattered following the birth of their fourth son, Luke. In 1999, Andrea experienced a devastating psychological collapse characterized by extreme lethargy and terrifying hallucinations. She engaged in acts of self-harm, attempting to end her own life to escape the voices crowding her mind. The severity of her condition forced her admission into an inpatient psychiatric facility. During her hospitalization, Dr. Ellen Starbranch evaluated Andrea and issued a stark, undeniable medical warning to the couple. The psychiatrist told Rusty and Andrea that having another child would guarantee a catastrophic resurgence of future psychotic episodes. Dr. Starbranch documented this severe risk in her medical charts, establishing a clear boundary for the safety of the mother. Despite this definitive professional warning, the couple allowed their religious convictions to override medical science. They believed their faith mandated a large family dismissing the documented diagnosis of postpartum psychosis. The healthcare system lacked the legal authority to monitor her reproductive choices, exposing a fatal gap in maternal mental health protocols. Within months of the warning, Andrea conceived their fifth child, Mary. The medical establishment stepped back, bound by rigid privacy laws and a lack of follow-up protocols for high-risk psychiatric patients out of their immediate care. This massive failure of preventative intervention paved the way for the ultimate disaster. Mary was born in late 2000, and the predicted psychological nightmare became a reality. The situation worsened when Andrea's father passed away shortly after the birth, removing one of her last tethers to the outside world. Andrea spiraled into an abyss of severe catatonia and relentless religious delusions. She refused to speak, stopped feeding Mary, and stared at the walls of the house for hours at a time. The delusions convinced her that she bore the mark of Satan and possessed a corrupted soul. She believed this demonic taint infected her children, guaranteeing their eternal damnation. She sought psychiatric help again, but the treatment approach proved flawed and inconsistent. Her medical providers altered her medication regimen, swapping prescriptions without allowing the chemicals to stabilize her brain chemistry. In the spring of 2001, a critical and fatal medical error occurred within her treatment plan. Her new physician tapered her off the antipsychotic drug Haldol, the only medication that had silenced the voices. The decision to remove the chemical anchor left her mind vulnerable to the expanding psychosis. Insurance, limitations, and rushed clinical appointments meant the doctors relied on brief 15-minute evaluations rather than deep psychological assessments. This superficial oversight stripped Andrea of her last line of medical defense. By the middle of June, the darkness inside Andrea reached a breaking point. The geographic layout of the house isolated the master bathroom at the far end of the hallway away from the front windows and neighborhood eyes. The heavy porcelain bathtub sat like a permanent fixture in the shadowed room, connected to plumbing that roared when the faucets opened. On the morning of June 20th, 2001, the routine of the house began like any other Wednesday. Rusty prepared for his engineering job at the Space Center, eating breakfast with the children in the kitchen. He observed Andrea in a robotic state but proceeded with his plan to leave for the office. He intended to leave her alone for just 1 hour, anticipating that his mother would arrive at 10 in the morning to assist with the children. Rusty walked out the front door at 9 in the morning, starting his car engine in the wide driveway. The heavy front door clicked shut, sealing the 5 children inside with the mother experiencing a complete psychotic break. The sound of Rusty's car fading down the street triggered a chilling finality. This brief, 60-minute window of isolation provided the exact opportunity Andrea needed. The systemic failures, ignored warnings, and untreated delusions all converged in the silence of the empty suburban house. The children resumed their morning activities, left unprotected from the danger inside their own home. The stage was set for an unimaginable horror in the master bathroom. The silence of the house settled over the living room as the front door closed at 9 in the morning. Andrea walked 30 feet down the central hallway toward the master bathroom. She turned the heavy metal handles of the bathtub. Water poured from the faucet, filling the deep porcelain basin to the rim. A devastating delusion commanded her mind. She held a firm belief that Satan claimed her children and that submerging them in water offered the only path to save their eternal souls. She started the grim process with the younger boys overpowering them in the bathroom. The physical size disparity left the children defenseless against the determined mother. She held them beneath the surface of the water until the struggle ceased and life departed their small bodies. She lifted John, Paul, and Luke from the basin in sequence. She carried their lifeless forms to the master bedroom, a few feet down the hall. She placed the brothers next to each other on the mattress. She pulled a crisp white sheet over their faces, creating a pristine, horrifying tableau of false peace. 6-month-old Mary faced the same devastating fate in the enclosed space of the bathroom. Andrea placed the infant into the deep water, letting the dark delusion dictate the tragic action. During this horrific sequence, 7-year-old Noah stepped through the bathroom doorway. The eldest child witnessed the terrifying scene and recognized the danger in his mother's eyes. He turned his back and fled down the long hallway toward the front door. Andrea chased the terrified boy through the house, catching him before he reached safety. She dragged the struggling child back across the carpeted floors to the master bathroom. She forced him into the basin alongside the infant, stealing his future in the cold water. She left Mary resting in the tub, abandoning the devastating wreckage of her family. She picked up the telephone receiver in the kitchen at 9:45 in the morning. She dialed the 911 emergency dispatcher, refusing to offer explanations for her request for police presence. She dialed a second time to instruct Rusty to return to the residence. She stood in the center of the living room in wet clothes, waiting in absolute silence for the authorities to arrive. Houston police officers transformed the quiet Clear Lake property into a sprawling active crime scene within minutes of their arrival. Patrol vehicles blocked the wide driveway, while crime scene technicians carried heavy black cases of forensic equipment through the front door. Detectives mapped the spatial layout of the residence, measuring the exact distances between the kitchen telephone, the master bedroom, and the porcelain bathtub. The initial homicide investigation hit an immediate and staggering wall of psychological complexity. The physical evidence offered no alternate suspects, forced entries, or defensive wounds indicating outside intrusion. Andrea offered zero resistance during her arrest, extending her hands for the heavy metal cuffs without a change in her flat, vacant expression. Law enforcement officers placed her in the back of a squad car, driving her from the shattered suburban fortress. The narrative shifted from a search for a phantom intruder to a deep dive into an immense medical mystery. Investigators confiscated boxes of prescription bottles from the bathroom cabinets and seized medical records from local psychiatric clinics. The community demanded answers for the loss of 5 innocent lives, forcing the legal system to examine the mind of the perpetrator. Police protocol required a motive, but the detectives found only a labyrinth of religious hallucinations and documented mental decay. The investigation exposed a profound disconnect between the reality of the home and the image projected to the neighborhood. During the summer and autumn of 2001, defense attorneys and state prosecutors scoured thousands of pages of psychiatric evaluations. The legal teams dissected the actions of the medical professionals who interacted with the Yates family. The paperwork revealed an astonishing trail of systemic negligence and rigid insurance protocols. Clinic administrators restricted Andrea to brief 15-minute medication checks, prioritizing patient volume over deep psychological care. The records confirmed the fatal medical decision to taper Andrea off Haldol, the specific chemical required to suppress her visual and auditory hallucinations. Despite this mountain of medical evidence detailing a shattered mind, the legal framework of Texas presented an unforgiving barrier. The state relied on a strict interpretation of the insanity defense, requiring the defense to prove the perpetrator did not know the action was a crime. The prosecution team seized upon this rigid legal loophole to build a case for capital punishment. They argued that the tragedy required calculated planning and deliberate execution, ignoring the profound medical context. The prosecutors viewed the telephone calls to the police and to Rusty as absolute proof of legal awareness. They built their strategy around the premise that calling authorities demonstrated an understanding of the crime. The defense faced the impossible task of proving that severe psychosis negated the concept of legal consequence. The trial commenced in Harris County in the first months of 2002, drawing intense media scrutiny to the wood-paneled courtroom. The prosecution sought capital punishment, framing Andrea as a calculating predator hiding behind a veil of mental illness. The state presented a relentless timeline of the morning of June 20th, emphasizing the sequential nature of the tragedy. Prosecutors pointed to the sheet placed over the boys in the master bedroom as evidence of methodical, conscious intent. The defense countered with testimony from multiple mental health experts, painting a picture of a woman consumed by demonic delusions. The jury listened to harrowing descriptions of the postpartum psychosis that hijacked Andrea's brain chemistry. Despite the compelling medical testimony, the prosecution team possessed a powerful weapon to anchor their narrative of premeditation. They introduced renowned forensic psychiatrist Dr. Park Yates as their star witness. The prosecution needed to dismantle the insanity defense and prove that Andrea drew inspiration from external sources instead of internal hallucinations. The outcome of the trial hinged on the testimony of this high-profile expert. The jury leaned forward in their heavy wooden chairs, waiting for the definitive medical opinion that would decide the fate of the mother. Dr. Yates took the witness stand and delivered a devastating blow to the defense team. He testified under oath that Andrea consumed television media that influenced her actions in the master bathroom. The psychiatrist detailed an episode of the television program Law and Order that focused on a woman who drowned her own children. He stated with absolute authority that this specific episode aired on television prior to the tragedy in the Clear Lake home. He argued that Andrea watched this fictional broadcast and modeled her actions after the television narrative. This testimony provided the exact factual anchor the prosecution needed to prove premeditation and calculated malice. The jury absorbed this information, viewing the tragedy not as an act of untreated psychosis, but as a copycat scenario inspired by popular culture. This specific defense dead end blocked any remaining sympathy for the perpetrator's mental state. The jurors accepted the expert testimony as undeniable fact, trusting the credentials of the prominent state witness. The narrative of the Law and Order episode sealed the perspective of the courtroom, overshadowing the thousands of pages of documented medical history. The focus shifted from systemic medical failures and locked onto the image of a mother calculating a horrific plot. In the early spring of 2002, the heavy oak doors of the Harris County courtroom closed as the jury delivered their verdict. They convicted Andrea Yates of capital offenses, rejecting the insanity defense based on the powerful testimony of the state psychiatrist. The judge sentenced the mother to life in prison, seemingly bringing a definitive end to the tragic legal saga. State authorities transferred Andrea from the county holding center to a high-security state penitentiary. They placed her in a sterile concrete cell behind heavy steel doors, isolating her from the outside world. The legal establishment believed they had successfully punished a calculating criminal. However, the defense attorneys refused to accept the finality of the court decision. They returned to their cramped legal offices in downtown Houston to review the trial transcripts line by line. The legal team focused their attention on the specific testimony regarding the television broadcast. They recognized that the entire narrative of premeditation hinged on the existence of that single media episode. The defense investigators contacted television networks and requested the official broadcast logs for the program Law and Order. They gathered stacks of video cassettes and network schedules, meticulously cross-referencing the air dates with the timeline of the Clear Lake tragedy. A stunning revelation emerged from the boxes of media archives. The investigators discovered a massive factual error that completely unraveled the case of the prosecution. No episode of the television show featuring a mother drowning her children had ever existed or aired prior to the fateful morning in June. Dr. Park Yates, the star witness for the state, had inadvertently presented false information to the jury while testifying under oath. The state had built their entire theory of calculated malice on a phantom piece of pop culture. This monumental evidentiary blunder shattered the narrative that Andrea drew inspiration from external sources. The realization proved that her actions stemmed entirely from the terrifying internal hallucinations generated by untreated psychosis. The state of Texas had convicted a severely ill woman based on a fictional broadcast that never occurred. Armed with this undeniable proof of false testimony, the defense attorneys filed an immediate appeal with the higher courts. They presented the network broadcast logs to the appellate judges, exposing the fundamental flaw in the original trial. The appellate court reviewed the transcripts and recognized the severe impact of the incorrect medical testimony on the jury. In 2005, the Texas First Court of Appeals issued a definitive ruling on the matter. The judges overturned the capital conviction of Andrea Yates, citing the introduction of the false television narrative. The legal decision erased the life sentence and removed Andrea from the high-security penitentiary. This crucial turning point forced the justice system to abandon the narrative of a cold, calculating predator. The courts ordered a second trial, resetting the legal clock to address the tragic reality of maternal mental health. The focus shifted away from phantom television programs and locked on to the documented medical history of severe psychological decay. The devastating reality of profound postpartum psychosis stepped directly into the spotlight of the American legal framework. In the summer of 2006, the legal system reconvened in a New Harris County courtroom for the retrial. The defense team adjusted their strategy, presenting a medically grounded picture of profound psychological destruction. They detailed the specific biological and chemical failures that generated the terrifying spiritual delusions in the mind of the mother. Medical experts testified that Andrea operated under a genuine warped belief that she was acting out of absolute spiritual necessity. The defense proved that the mother felt compelled to save her offspring from a demonic threat constructed entirely by her illness. The prosecution attempted to reinstate the narrative of legal awareness, but the absence of the false television testimony weakened their position. The 12 members of the new jury retreated to the deliberation room to weigh the immense medical evidence against the strict legal statutes. They reviewed the thousands of pages of psychiatric evaluations and the tragic timeline of the Clear Lake home. After 3 days of intense deliberation, the jury returned to the wooden benches and delivered a landmark decision. They found Andrea Yates not guilty by reason of insanity, prioritizing medical reality over punitive vengeance. The presiding judge immediately ordered her commitment to a state psychiatric facility for comprehensive lifelong care. State authorities transported Andrea from the county jail system to the North Texas State Hospital. Medical administrators later transferred her to the Kerrville State Hospital, a low-security mental health facility situated in the quiet terrain of the Texas Hill Country. She resides within the sprawling campus of the hospital, receiving continuous specialized psychiatric treatment away from the public eye. Rusty Yates finalized a divorce from Andrea in 2004, legally separating their lives before the appellate courts overturned the initial conviction. He eventually remarried and built a new life, but he consistently maintains a public stance regarding the origin of the tragedy. He points to the rigid insurance protocols and the devastating failures of the psychiatric clinics as the true catalysts for the loss of his family. The heartbreaking absence of Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and baby Mary forced an undeniable reckoning within the American medical establishment. Their untimely demise fundamentally transformed how society identifies and treats the severe spectrum of maternal mental illness. Hospitals and clinics implemented urgent screening protocols for postpartum depression and psychosis, closing the fatal gaps that doomed the Yates family. The tragedy stands as a permanent sobering benchmark in forensic psychiatry and legal jurisprudence. The legacy of the 5 children ensures that severe maternal psychological crises are met with immediate medical intervention instead of systemic neglect.